Hello, music lovers and culturally defined human organisms. Welcome back to the podcast, John's Zoom Jams. Looking back on what I've discussed, I went through each of the decades dating back since the 1950s, and I talked about how each decade was influential to the culture of that particular decade. So in the 60s, I talked about hippies and psychedelic rock, going through to the 90s, where I discussed punk and grunge music and the following that music gave. In the last episode, I talked about early 2000s music leading into the 2010s as well. We're at the beginning of a new decade, a bad start at one, but nonetheless, we still need to think about what music is to come and what direction rock music may be heading in, if at all. Today, I'm joined with Professor Bryan Powell. Dr. Powell is an assistant professor of music education at music technology at Montclair State University. Hello, Bryan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. You're also the co-author and editor of several books on music education. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, a lot of my scholarship focuses on music technology and on the inclusion of popular musics into school music spaces. So that's a lot of my work has that focus.
Right. And I saw that your research interests include informal learning, like non-formal practices, popular music education, urban education, philosophy of music education, community music research, and alternative music education. I love reading that. Like, tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, an impressive job searching up my CV. This is good. Uh, if you've ever participated in school music, especially in high schools, school music education is dominated by bands like concert bands, choirs, and orchestras. However, when we think of music in the biggest sense, music is expansive, it's massive, it incorporates so many different genres and traditions. And then when we put the word education after music, we lose out on about 90% of that music, 95% of that music. And that's for a number of reasons. That's a different podcast. But, our music traditions in schools come from military and church and aristocracy traditions. But they're not necessarily connected to the work that a lot of students are doing and their musical identity. So I was really influenced. I was a public school music teacher in East Harlem in New York City, in a public school that had elementary, middle school there. And it was during that time where it kind of really came into focus for me that, my students that I was working with were really passionate about music, but they didn't really want to play trombone or clarinet or kind of the traditional music things. And so I started getting into popular music in the classroom, songwriting, beat making, doing listening for music that they were passionate about, and that's influenced a lot of my work. So I'm grateful to be at the Cali School of Music here at Montclair State University, and a lot of my classes are around popular music and integrating music technology into music education spaces to try to attract students to participate in music who aren't doing the band and choir and orchestra thing, but all those other students who might be interested in engaging in music if it was a little bit more connected to their lives.
Nice. That's a really good background. I think just by that alone, it'd be a pleasure to have you as a teacher. I
Oh,
think that's
well,
really cool.
if anyone wants to, sign up for one of my classes, I sometimes teach rap and rock. Let me say that again. Rap and rock is cultural phenomena. There's a class
Right.
at Montclair State that actually, as you were talking about, like the decades, a lot of that similar content's covered. So if you need that, whatever that gen ed class is, I'd recommend signing up for a rock and rap. It's a good course.
Is this just a plug for you, or is this a podcast?
Yeah, I'm just trying to recruit students to sign up for my classes. That's the only reason I'm here.
Well, that's good too. I'm fine with that. But
no, it's all good.
dating to the reason we're here, of course, is to talk about rock music in the modern age. And I'm happy to have you on this one because I think I'm interested to pick your brain on theories you might have for the future of rock music. Because I have been focusing on rock and roll because there's obviously so many genres throughout time that I tried to avoid because it just would have been too much. But I wanted to focus strictly on rock and roll and the alternative kind of music from that. So many rock fans of the modern age, I think they would argue that rock and roll has been long dead. Like I've heard about this before, and maybe you have as well.
Yeah.
And the dig for new rock music or original punk is tough. And I think many music critics argue that no rock artist is doing anything too inspiring today. So where do we think rock, punk, or guitar music is headed? Is there any worthy original rock movements happening at all? Is rock dead? Like, could we make that claim, you think?
And Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm interested to hear your take first before I move on.
Yeah, so the death of rock and roll has been a lot of people have been saying that over the decade, and I think you actually touched on a really important aspect of that. It's are people doing creative things? Are people pushing boundaries? The demographic that oftentimes decides what's popular are teenagers, high school, and going into college students. And I think one of the challenges of rock music as of late is that rock bands, as they've gotten older, their audiences have gotten older. I'm 40 years old myself, and so I love rock music. But I remember growing up when Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and those bands were part of the part of the ethos, and they were on uh, popular music radio stations, and you could go to concerts and see them live. And a lot has changed since then. The way that we experience music, the way that we stream music, the way that we experience music through YouTube or Spotify. I think one of the challenges for rock as of late is that the last kind of mainstream era for rock, it seems, if we look back in a certain way, is kind of when like Korn and early like Linkin Park and Slipknot and Limp Bizkit and some of those bands had some popularities, but as they've gotten older and their fans have gotten older, they haven't been replaced by groups that are really attracting this kind of teenage and college audience to spurn them into popularity. I think what's been interesting now is that we're seeing some rock and some guitar based instruction come in from other genres. I think the most prevalent example right now is like Machine Gun Kelly, who is a rapper, is plugging an electric guitar, and he's performing with like Travis Barker from Blink 182 and Youngblood, and I mean, and like Youngblood, even in his singing style, it sounds like he's from like the mid 2000s, one of those kind of emo rock bands. And so I think that there are other hip hop artists.
I was thinking of Post Malone, who covered
Exactly,
Nirvana music,
for sure. And he put on that live stream where he did
which was
all
great. I
those.
don't know what your thoughts
Oh
were,
yeah, no,
but
I see. I loved it because I love
but
anything that breaks down barriers between like this is rock and this is rap and this is country and this is whatever. I'm really into that, and I remember he was wearing like a muumuu or a dress for some of
yes,
it
kind of
as I
like an
watched it.
a tribute to Kurt would be in a way.
Right, exactly. And so like Post Malone is a good example of he's hip hop, but he has this rock history and he plays guitar.
Hmm.
Juice World, before he died, unfortunately, he had some stuff that came out, and we're seeing like Tame Impala, who's kind of like indie rock, and
Wow.
they're collaborating with like Travis Scott. And so what's interesting is we're seeing more kind of rock and guitar based music coming from hip hop community than we are necessarily seeing like yeah, Panic at the Disco, I guess, is kind of pop rock, but even then, it's like who are the rock bands now that are having mass popularity? I went
Hmm.
to a metal festival, a rock and metal festival in the UK a couple of years ago, and there are a bunch of traditional like kind of rock and heavier rock bands. Rival Sons comes to mind. And I didn't know about them at all until I saw them live. But they're kind of known on a certain scene, but they're not breaking through. And I'll share one point, and then I'll stop talking because you probably have other connections. I think
No, I love it. Keep going.
one of the challenges is how we experience artists anymore, and they are largely solo artists. There was an era of bands. We think of the Beatles, we think of Zeppelin, and then I mean, well, early on we had big bands, and then you had like the big band leader who was like and then a singer would be a part of that, and so we kind of trace the trajectory. But now, I mean, think of like rap groups like Wu-Tang or whatever. We don't see as many rap groups. We see individual artists. And the pop scene, we see individual artists. Even Panic at the Disco, it's Brandon Urie and some other dudes.
Hmm.
Even oftentimes in our rock bands as we experience them now, it's more about the solo artist with streaming, with YouTube. So I think one of the challenges of rock is we think of rock bands, but the way that people are supporting music, streaming, touring, the band concept isn't as relevant now. than it was. It's more about a solo individual artist. That's a better financial model than what we had previously. So there are some
Right.
other thoughts I could share, but I think that rock is not necessarily dead. I just think that we're seeing elements of rock and guitar centered music coming from other genres, not necessarily from rock music itself.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's it for the podcast. You just nailed it, man.
All right, good. Glad to be here. See y'all later.
Good take. Good take. Well, it's something I did want to bring up. A lot of great points you brought up, and I'm not going to get too nerdy here, but you mentioned Tame Impala, and I went like, wow, because that's probably one of my favorite modern bands. But
Yeah.
the funny thing is, not to get nerdy, like I'm saying, but you were talking about the solo artists and how that's a huge thing today. Even like in rap groups, it's not a big thing. Run DMC, Wu-Tang, and bands themselves aren't like a big popular thing today. But Tame Impala has the appearance of a band, but it's actually recorded all by one person.
Yeah, a multi-instrumentalist out of Australia. So yeah, absolutely. And that's a throwback to like Boston's first record. It was one guy who recorded all the parts,
Wow.
and then More Than a Feeling or whatever, it blew up, and it's like, oh, I got to get a band together. And that's another thing with technology. Technology allows us to not need a band. Like I can in real time add drum tracks, add a bass track to my guitar playing. I can add a guitar track, I can add vocals, I can add harmonies, all from my laptop, all from my iPhone. I mean, I think it was Kendrick Lamar who recorded one of the songs on his last album, was entirely recorded and produced on the iPhone. So the idea of needing a band to experience and make music, that's no longer the case. And so we're seeing EDM and hip hop and beat making where one person can kind of create these things becoming more prevalent. But I love Tame Impala, and they have a unique aesthetic. When we talked about earlier, it's like who's pushing boundaries, who's doing interesting things. I would put Tame Impala in that group. They have a sound, and maybe he's Australian, maybe it's an Australian influence, maybe there's some other local scenes there that we're just kind of catching on to. But I think that there's a unique kind of value proposition that he's bringing through Tame Impala, and then some of the, again, collaborating or producing songs for Travis Scott or bringing some of those things in. I mean, we look at, again, like Juice WRLD or Travis Scott's album Astroworld that went huge. It's not traditional like boom bap rap. It's really kind of musically intricate, a lot of it. I mean, there's really interesting things happening in other genres, and so I think young folks who often they control the needle of what's popular, they're being drawn to that, and that makes sense. Also, I feel like rock bands, the album was really important. You go back to these concept albums, like Sgt. Pepper was an important album, and it was important to listen to the tracks, and they were placed in an order on purpose. And now we don't experience albums in the same way. It's less important to have an album,
Right.
and for a lot of artists,
I find that to be unfortunate myself because I love the album.
Right. And and I grew up listening to albums where you'd put a CD or whatever in your car, and you knew the album from start to finish, and you knew like the beginning note of the next song from where this song ended, because you experienced this journey or this trajectory. And there's also this element, and I know I'm coming across as like an old fuddy-duddy, like back in my day. But back in my day, when you wanted to access music, there was an element of sacrifice. So I had to mow lawns to earn money. And then when the new Rage Against the Machine album came out on a Tuesday, I had to get like my grandma to drive me to the mall. For those of you learners a mall is like a big place with a bunch of stores, and they had a record store in there. But like I had to go and I had to buy.
What's a record, man?
I know. I've got some here. I'll pull them down for a visual podcast. And then you bought the album, and it cost 15 $18 or whatever. And so there was like a serious commitment. Not only did I have to work to get the money, and then I had to expend effort to get there, but then I bought this album, and I love Rage Against the Machine, so this is a bad example, but like let's say I bought another album because there was one REM song that I liked, and the rest of the album I wasn't crazy about, but I just spent like $18. So I'm going to listen to this album over and over until I like it, because I've invested in it. Right. And I'm a teenager who doesn't have money. Now there's not the same sacrifice for engaging with music. When a new album comes out, it's like you immediately have access to it on your phone because you have Spotify or you have Apple Music or you have Tidal, or even through YouTube. You can, like, you immediately have access. So the kind of effort and sacrifice that you used to have to make to and owning music was important. We had these CD books and we had like, and owning the album. There were some CDs. I bought tapes initially when I was younger, but CDs were mostly aligned with my high school. Like, there are CDs that I bought 2 times because I wore the one of them out. Like, there was a sense of pride in owning your own music. Now, no one wants to own their own music because it takes up space on your laptop or on your phone, or you got to carry on a CD binder. You just want to have access to it. That's the important thing. And so I think, and this I'm bringing it back to my band and the album thing. I think because you initially have access to everything, the single is the important thing. So if Ariana Grande releases a single, I don't even really know if she's released an album. I just know she has a single that's popular. And so from an artist standpoint, I think they would probably rather have 10 singles that they put out there at different times than they would to drop one album and hope it catches on.
Wow.
Because of the way we experience it. And that goes against bands and album concepts and the songwriting process. And it is unfortunate as someone who likes bands and is nostalgic for listening from an album front to end, and knowing that the artists really thought through the order in which they were going to put these songs, and some of them are programmatic in the way that they tell a story. And I think that, there are some challenges there. And that doesn't mean that there aren't artists now who aren't putting out albums that are important. There are albums that tell stories. But I think that there's a lot of things working against the traditional rock band, electric guitarist, bass, drums, vocalist, maybe keyboard, who would record an album. And also duration. We think about our rock bands, they would release an album every 2 or 3 years. That model doesn't work in the kind of immediate environment that we have now where everything's instantly accessible. You need to be putting out stuff all the time. You need to be on social media. You need to be like content creators. Right. Rock bands historically they have terrible social media accounts because that's not what they're doing. And some of them, especially if you're in punk, you're not going to Instagram. The Clash wouldn't be going to Facebook to post to be content creators and live streaming or whatever.
Make sure checking you're going to a concert.
Yeah. Click the like button and ring the bell. And the Clash would never do that. Or any of these bands that we respect, because it's about the music. But at the same time, in this environment now, it's like you need to be able to engage on social media. You need to be content creators. You need to be influencers who also make music. And that's a challenge for a lot of kind of traditional rock bands, because that's not what they're about. And so, I don't think it's all negative. And circling back, is rock dead forever? I don't think so. A lot of things, there's a pendulum, as I'm sure in all music, and then what's old is new again, and people bring things back. But I think that things need to continue to evolve. And so we probably need to have rock bands who kind of rethink their marketing, the album versus single, the social media aspect, the more rapid release of content, and then touring. Touring is still a really important element, because touring is the one thing, and in a COVID time, this is terrible, but touring is one of the few things that you just can't replicate, like Coachella or your local festival or the Warped Tour or whatever it is. There's still people want to pay money to go see bands live, because you can't replicate that by watching a YouTube video. You can't replicate that by just streaming the content. And so I think that's where I think there is some hope in, once the world returns back to normal, maybe whatever normal looks like, we might see, more tours, and people are going to want to get out and see live music. And in some ways, I've been to a lot of hip hop shows. Oftentimes they're not as compelling as rock shows, because the solo of the electric guitarist and the sing-along nature, to rap shows, so many times you have lots of rappers, and you have a DJ, and it doesn't sound as good kind of as it does on the album. Depends on, I've seen Gangstar, I've seen Wu-Tang, I've seen some rap collectives who I like, that it just wasn't as good in seeing it in person. where I mean Kendrick Lamar puts on a great live show, but I think that's where rock bands still have some leverage. They still have some value is in creating that experience that you just can't replicate. Sitting with headphones on in
Definitely.
front of your laptop.
Right. And you brought up a good point before about how we have so much easy access to music today. And that point about the 10 singles instead of a 10 song album like blew my mind. Like I never thought of it like that. That's a really good point. And I was thinking of how, because I've thought about this before. Apple and Spotify, like I have Apple Music and I love it. And so many people do. And I'm sure you've been seeing all the 2020 yearly wrapped things going
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
But I love mine, but I recognize that I think music fans are really divided because of these services. Is that
Hmm.
like we have such easy access to anything we want at a touch of a button, and there's not a lot of community as like there used to be. Because I feel like back before the services, a time before that, it was a lot of word of mouth, and like you would be with friends who listen to this music, and it was just more of a community. And that's something I touched on about the culture of the past decades that I was talking about, like with hippies or punks. It was like a movement. I don't think we're
Yeah.
seeing a huge movement of a particular genre anymore because everyone's just so split up. I mean, there's festivals for every genre. It's hard to see a band at the forefront of like the mainstream music, something like Nirvana or Metallica as of late.
Right. Well, and again, it goes back to the way that we. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. If we go back long enough, I mean, not to give a huge history lesson, but there were times when, like, if you heard music, it was being performed live in front of you because we didn't have recording technology or the wax cylinder or the microphone. And then when we had music and it could be recorded, it was played out loud and it was listened to, and people would gather around the radio or they would gather around the record player. I remember listening to albums with friends. Like you'd get together and you'd just listen to like an album,
Right.
and you could chat and you could have some food, but it was a communal experience. And then the Walkman turned into the Discman, turned into the iPod, turned into earbuds, and everyone has their own personal music at all times. And that's a great thing with access, but music experience in some ways has become more of a personal activity. I don't need a band to write the song. I have access to drum tracks and loops, and I have like all these digital audio workstations.
Right.
I have ways to create that don't need to be collaborative, and I think we're seeing some of the challenges of that you do have instant access, and the Spotify thing is an important and it's something that I struggle with because, like, we know that Apple Music and Spotify and everyone else, they're not paying the artists.
Right.
I mean,
That's a really huge topic.
you're right, and I mean, they're paying them a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a penny for every million streams or something, and so, and that's a challenge. And so, I would love to, as someone who supports music and supports live music and supports artists, and used to buy albums because it's important to, and I didn't even when Napster and LimeWire, like I didn't steal music off the internet because I wanted to support the artist and buy the album.
Yeah.
And
And you
again, it
didn't
was
want to put a virus on your computer either.
yeah, exactly. And I probably was scared that they would come and sue me or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was important for me to own that Rage Against the Machine album. It wasn't just important to have it on my computer. It was important for me to actually physically own it and look at the liner notes with the lyrics and see
Mm.
the pictures and like engage with that physical artifact of the music. Um, I think the challenge now is like I don't want to. I have Spotify. I don't want to cancel my Spotify subscription because I love having access to every, and especially as a
Yeah.
music educator,
Of
I'm
course.
always pulling up because someone's like, "Oh, I don't know Tame Impala." I'm like, "Hold on, let me play for you right now." Like, let me
Please share that.
in
Share their music.
exactly like in this immediacy. Like we want things, and I want that as an educator. I want to be like, "Let me play this. Oh, you haven't heard that? Let me play this for you, and let me play that
Mhm.
for you." But I know that only the Adeles and the Taylor Swifts and the Travis Scotts are actually doing well from Spotify. And I know all these other artists, they're not getting any money for their work, and the only way they can make work is is by touring. Even friends bands or local stuff, they're like, hey, we got CDs on sale at the back. I'm just thinking,
Mhm.
who's got a CD player anymore? If they're on Spotify, I'll just listen to it there. And it's a
Right.
challenge because same challenge I feel when I go to like Walmart instead of like my local store. It's like,
Oh
well
yeah.
Walmart's super convenient. or
Yeah.
I shop on Amazon because it's super convenient. But I would love to not do that because like so I think there are these challenges
Yeah.
here, and it's something that I think the rock community is going to have to because there are loyal fans. There are loyal fans in the metal community, but as these bands get older, we're getting older. Like Post Malone did that collab with Ozzy Osbourne,
Hmm.
and I saw Black
Yeah, I heard that.
Sabbath. I saw Black Sabbath a couple years ago in concert, and they're old, man. Like, yeah, Sabbath
Oh man.
but Ozzy doesn't have
Ozzy's
it
gonna live
anymore.
forever though, so I mean, he's a vampire.
I
I don't know what to
yeah,
tell you.
actually, the Iron Maiden, Bruce, the lead singer of Iron Maiden, he sounds as good as he's ever sounded, and he's been doing it forever. But like, the
Wow.
problem is, the fans of that music as we get older, like a college student who's doing a podcast on like rock and roll, like you are the exception, not the rule. A lot of my students are like, "Hey, Jude, who sings that song?" And you're like, "Oh man, come on, y'all, the Beatles.
Who
You
sings
know the
that? I
Beatles."
don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. They've heard it because it was on a commercial or something. But
Yeah.
I feel like the rock community needs to figure out like how do we engage a younger artist? How do we kind of
Right.
make music more accessible? Because the guitar is still cool, and I know that I'm biased because I think the guitar is cool. But like I've taught music in public schools, and like you
I can
plug an
tell from the
electric.
guitar behind you there.
Man, I've got like if you could see like wider, I've got
That's good.
probably 30 guitars in this room and ukuleles and
Love it. I'm
ba-
also a guitarist. We all love to show off our gear.
yeah,
It's normal.
basses. I've got it all. But you plug an electric guitar into an amp, and you let like a middle school kid come and do something like it's still a compelling instrument. The drum kit, even though I can do beat making now digitally and it sounds awesome, there's something cool about sitting down at a drum kit and hitting it and playing a rock groove. So I feel like there's still value in these kind of rock music approaches. Just there needs to be some kind of transition in marketing and in collaborations, and in bringing these things back. Otherwise, I don't want to say it's ever going to die, but there are, jazz was the popular music of the 1920s and 30s, and then it's 40s, and then it now jazz isn't a popular music, and so maybe, and this makes me sad, but maybe it's okay that rock music is going to die. Maybe that's the natural trajectory of what music and genres are, and like jazz music was and swing music was the popular music, and then now it's not, and now no one really listens to jazz unless they're kind of doing these throwback things, and there are certain jazz influences that carry on,
Or
and
pretentious people.
yeah, and maybe that's what happens with rock. Maybe
Yeah.
it's yeah. Don't let anyone on the Jeff Kunkel, that runs the jazz program at Montclair State. I didn't say that,
Oops.
Jeff. But yeah, and maybe that's what happens with rock, and maybe there's the loyalists who want to stick with it, and then but I still have to imagine that like there are going to be kids who like discover the Doors or discover like these old records or albums from parents and then kind of fall in love with it all over and over again. So
Right.
I think that things are cyclical.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily want rock bands to be like, hey, follow us on social media and we're going to just release singles and we don't care about the band, like, because then it's not the thing that we love about it.
Right.
But things evolve and change, and
Yeah.
we'll have to see where things move forward. But again, when Machine Gun Kelly started doing his stuff and playing electric guitar, and Travis Barker, I was like, oh, this is cool and unexpected. And Post Malone is playing
Right.
electric guitar and
Yeah.
soloing, and Travis Barker from Blink-182 is like doing all these things with all these kind of hip hop artists and R&B artists, and so there's still a lot of it there. You just got to kind of
Hmm.
seek
Of
out and find it.
course. And there's been a lot of resurgence of like older rock music because I think, speaking of like psychedelic rock, like Tame Impala or King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard or even
Mhm.
Flaming Lips are still releasing music.
Yeah.
I think there's other genres like, I call it like riff rock. Like Queens of the Stone Age just released an album. Foo Fighters are releasing an album very soon.
Mhm.
Punk music, Blink still releases music. Green Day, Against Me. I think these are good examples of like music, but it's one of those things where it's just like, with the exception of like Tame Impala or like King Gizzard, these bands are like older and like they just have a following
Right.
of fans from the 90s, really.
And that was my point. It's like, do you think high school kids, like I love Dave Grohl. I mean, he's like
Yeah,
he was
no,
in
he's great.
I mean, he
Love
was the
the
drummer in
first Foo Fighters
Nirvana,
record.
and he's in Foo Fighters,
Yeah.
and he played on like the Queens of the Stone Age album, and he was
Yes.
in them Crooked Vultures. Like Dave Grohl is like up here for me.
He doesn't. The
Um,
grind doesn't stop with him. He's always working.
yeah,
Look at all that coffee he drinks, probably.
and he does. I was blessed to meet him one time, and
Oh
he
my
did a mute.
God.
I was at I was doing a student group, and he came in. He played music with my kids, and then afterwards, I was like, "That was
What?
awesome." And he's like, "Oh, thanks for what you've done for these kids." And he gave me like the handshake hug, and I was just
No
like,
way.
"Yeah,
Oh my
humble
God.
brag."
By
And he's
extension, I've met Dave Grohl now too. I
yeah,
think.
you're 1 degree removed. It's not like he'd see me and be like, "Oh, Bryan, what's up, man?" But he was the coolest. Like
Yeah,
they
yeah.
say, don't meet your idols because you'll be
Oh
disappointed. But
yeah.
Dave Grohl was like, he was amazing. But I feel like high school kids now, or even early college kids, they probably don't care that like Queens of the Stone Age or Foo Fighters or any of these things, are releasing albums, because I think it's the audience for those people are getting older. Um, and again, maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to fight
Hmm.
to hold on to something that was good and now is evolving. And I think as we look forward, I think the future of all music is like fewer silos, fewer like this is rock, this is R&B,
Hmm.
this is rap, and we're seeing that now. It's like not to keep bringing up Machine Gun Kelly, but he's a rapper, but he does this rock thing, and Taylor
And
Swift.
acting too.
Yeah, and he's in movies, and Taylor Swift was a country artist, and then she was just a pop artist, and then she started
Hmm.
releasing these things that were like kind of EDM, like I Knew You Were Trouble When You Walked In has this like bass drop, and then now she pulls out this like folk album, with like banjo and singer-songwriter, and I think that's kind of the future of music, because
Right. Wow.
humans now are growing up. Like I had to be exposed to music by I had an older brother and I had a dad. So when we think about like, oh, my brother's record collection of the Doors and this and that, and he taught me like that, those kind of stories that you hear. Um, our students now, they're growing up listening. They have access to rock music, and they also know like Adele's "Someone Like You" because it was everywhere, and they know if there's a country, and they know who Taylor Swift is, whether they like her or not. And so there's a lot of influences. So I think as music creators, artists and bands, and you open up GarageBand or Fruity Loops or Logic or Ableton or Pro Tools, there's just thousands of loops and music creative ideas from every genre, and you can throw in a hip hop beat with like an EDM bass drop and a traditional guitar chord progression.
Right.
And you can create something. You're like, wait, is that rock? Is that EDM? Is that hip hop? And I think the future of music is like it doesn't matter,
Right.
and it's going to be less siloed, like this is here and this is here and this is here,
Yeah.
and it's going to be more, we're seeing hip hop where or even old, Smashing Pumpkins, they're doing stuff with orchestras, and but it wasn't classical music. And so I feel like as we look forward, I'm generally optimistic about the future of music
Mhm.
creation, because I think it's been democratized in some ways. Like more people have access to more music making abilities, but because of that, there's more noise out there that you've got to sift through. Like everyone can put something out on YouTube. Everyone could be on Spotify or Bandcamp or SoundCloud or whatever. And so I feel like more creators, I think generally is good. We just got to figure out like, how do we access things that are meaningful to us, and how do we understand these expressions when so many of it is going to be so much of it's going to be so varied.
Yeah. And maybe when you were saying, because you're absolutely right. I just watched a video recently that talks about Katy Perry. And like when she started out, it was like pop music. And then the song Dark Horse, it goes into this like EDM kind of sound. And I think that was because that's the music of the time. And that it like to adapt and kind of change the style was necessary maybe. And I was thinking of how we all have curated our own playlists today and genres. I think the reason why we see a lot of music today that's blending these genres, it's not like just rock or punk, it's not separated. They're bringing it together because I think people are listening or being exposed to a lot of music today, and maybe that's influencing them to write in different like songwritings in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, you brought up your top songs of 2020, and it's
Right.
like I've got like The Strokes, followed by Run the Jewels, who is like doing exciting things in hip hop, but also,
Uh-huh.
and then like Dua Lipa and like Pine Grove. It's like
Pine
indie, and
Grove,
it's
yeah,
like,
very Montclair.
yeah, very much. And again, I got turned on once I came to Montclair, and everyone's like, "You listen to Pine Grove, right?" And I'm
That's what
like,
happened to me. I was like, "Who's Pine Grove?" I went to Montclair. Oh my God, you
"Yeah,
don't know Pine Grove?
exactly."
Yeah.
So now I do. But
Yep.
like, yeah, you go down, and it's like, one thing after another. A lot of hip hop, but a lot of traditional rock, and then some old stuff. Like I'll always listen to Zeppelin as long as I live. Um, and I think that it's a good point of how we. And then I've got stuff from the Hamilton soundtrack.
Nice.
So,
Good.
um,
I still have yet to
so
see that whole thing.
oh, it's Disney Plus. You can watch it. It's good. I've got kids who are my own children who are really into it. And my wife was a musical theater major, so
You
there's a
like it
lot of
yourself
that.
as well?
Okay, so I mean, ultimately, yes, love it. I don't think the rapping in it is. If you like rap, you wouldn't take it out of context and be like, "This is good rapping." But like David Diggs is a great rapper. He's in this group called Clipping, and he's got an amazing flow. I think as a trajectory, I think it's really good. I think some of the early rap stuff. Um, is like rap that's accessible for a musical theater audience. You're going to get hate mail on this podcast because anyone who criticizes Hamilton is going down. So ultimately, I like Hamilton. It's great. I think some of the rapping is like hit or miss, but for rap. But the trajectory of it, I think, what it's done to make musical theater more accessible is
Yeah.
great.
You're gonna
So
run my podcast into the ground, man, with that kind of
yeah,
talk.
exactly. All of your listeners will be like, "Whoa, did he just critique Hamilton in some way? This sucks. I'm out."
That's funny. You mentioned Run the Jewels. Was that connected to Tom Morello? Was that the project they collaborated on? Or was
So they've done stuff.
Oh no, that was Cypress Hill, maybe. I can't
Yeah, with
remember.
Cypress Hill. Yeah, when Prophets of Rage,
Yeah, that's one.
replacing Zach De La Rocha. Run the Jewels are this really because LP, their producer is a white guy, and in rap we don't think necessarily of, other than Eminem and Logic and, yeah, a handful of others.
Right.
Um, but it's just really, and it's socially conscious, and it's music of our time, and but again, it's funny. And then like I've got a friend of mine's daughter is in a band who lives in the UK, and so like her stuff is on here. So um and before, like, yeah, you would, and then I like the Strokes, and they're doing some new stuff that isn't making any noise, but because I grew up liking the Strokes, in higigh school and college, um they're still good in my life. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think
I've
that's
heard a
kind of
lot
the
of good things
future.
about the new Strokes album, just in general. Like a lot of my friends have listened to it, and Anthony Fantano on YouTube has given a good review. Not that I'm his
Nice.
biggest fan, but I like that he's exposing, that kind of music to his audience and saying
Right.
like, "This is good."
And sometimes with critique, I remember the Strokes' second album came out, or maybe it was the third. They're like, "Well, it sounds just like the first album," and I was like, "Cool, I liked the first album.
Right.
This is good." And then you've got bands like Radiohead that they were
That was my next
changing.
point. You stole it from me.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is your podcast. You go ahead and talk about Radiohead.
No, you know what you're talking about.
All right. But and in some ways, when I first, you get Kid A, and you're like, "Wait, what is this?" It's not Pablo Honey, and it's, it. They were always reinventing, and I think
Of
Radiohead is a good
course.
example of that. They're
Yes,
not.
they are.
They're a rock band, but they're not, I mean, they're so much more. And most people
Right.
who I know who are into music and are players, like, everyone universally respects Radiohead as just what they've been able to do and have, the longevity of their career, which is pretty great.
I had the pleasure to see them on their last tour in North America back in 2018 at the Wells Fargo Center in Philly, and I
Nice.
loved it. It was my one of my favorite concerts, and I was in the pit, so that was a really great experience. But yeah, I always mention Radiohead about innovation in music because a lot of people know Creep, right? But that
Yeah.
album, Pablo Honey, is an album of its time. I think it came out like 95, 94, and
Hmm.
it's an acceptable grunge or like rock album. I think everyone can agree it's not a bad album. It's just not Radiohead that made them Radiohead. And it
Right.
wasn't until I think OK Computer is pretty rocky at times, but it's so alternative. It's so odd, and I love that. It's definitely my favorite Radiohead album. But as they went through their, you know, um, category, what's the word? catalog, I guess.
Right, yeah.
As they went through that, you could see the change even up until their most recent release being
Mm,
almost all electronic, and Tom
right.
York's solo stuff being all
Yeah,
electronic.
Eraser and Rainbows. I mean, there's just so many, and that's an example of, I think, a band that people can discover continually because they're always creating, and their live show is a good example of, you don't just go to a Radiohead show and then they just play the hits. It's an experience, and so I feel like the more we experience and experiment with music, and the more we collaborate, and the more we kind of blend between the genres.
Hmm.
Again, I'm optimistic. Whether rock is dead or not, like I think there are other people who can weigh in on that. But
Absolutely.
I hope not. But also, like, if that's the natural trajectory of things, and it's going to lead to new types of music exploration that aren't on our radar, then okay, cool. Let's see what's next.
Yeah. There's something I just thought of. I want your opinion on the recent Grammy nominations. So I looked through most of them, and I noticed, and this has been going around on social media, that the nominees for Best Rock Song were all female. Not, I love that. Like, I think Phoebe Bridgers' new album is
Yeah.
great. But I don't. It's hard to classify that as rock. Is this something that, like, is that the direction rock is going in? I don't know. I wouldn't. I guess Kyoto was a kind of a had a bass and drum tune, but the rest of the song I feel like
Yeah.
really rock.
Right, and she's very singer-songwriter, kind of emo-y,
Yeah.
double vocals, and I like her stuff a lot. This is a challenge when we try to codify things in these silos of this is rock, because, like, if does rock include like hard rock, and is Radiohead rock, and is Phoebe Bridgers rock, and
Yeah.
is St. Vincent rock, and that's something we didn't talk on. There's interesting things in female led bands that are a little bit more prevalent. Like when we think of formerly, it's Joan Jett and it's Nancy Wilson of Heart, and like we can name the female electric guitarists in kind of on one hand, and I think that's expanding out a little bit more in a good way. So it's like a lot of people have said the Grammys are irrelevant for a long time. And yes and no. Like I feel like they miss the boat sometimes, and then they're trying to catch up, and then the Weeknd's album wasn't nominated, maybe because
Yes.
he wasn't going to play for them because he wanted to do the Super Bowl as well, and they're like, okay, then I mean, it's a room of
I
people
know.
who just like this is the best, and who are they to
Exactly. Who are they? Everyone always asks that. Like, why? Who are they to decide? Same thing with Academy Awards. Not to talk about movies, but just like this is a
right.
weird process. It's not. I feel like it is kind of rigged. I don't think. I don't trust it all the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so I think it's nice to honor certain people and be like, oh, that one album of the year, songwriter of the year, or maybe it puts someone on your radar. I remember like Bon Iver won Best New Artist for their second album, and I was like, I was listening to them like a year and a half ago, and that album was better than this one. But the Grammys are just now like, oh, let's nominate them for new artists when they aren't. So yeah, I don't put a lot of stock into it. Like I'll pay attention, and sometimes there are some amazing performances at the Grammys because they'll partner up artists that wouldn't normally perform together. But yeah, like I don't get too worked up about it, because I think that ultimately, like whoever wins or loses, other than it's a nice honor for them, it's not going to affect my year in review playlist. It's not going to make me think, well, I can't listen to them because they weren't nominated. It's we have the
Totally.
power to connect with music that is personally meaningful to us.
Hmm.
And so what other people choose to validate or denigrate, I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't affect us as much. Although to win a Grammy in the little gramophone statue is a pretty cool honor, I'm sure.
Of course. Yeah. Not all due respect to the people who win and are nominated. It's just what do we classify as rock nowadays? I think that's just
Right.
something that's just a changing.
Yeah, and I'm actually, as soon as we get off this, I'm gonna go look up the Grammy nominations to see, like, yeah, because I saw the list when it was announced, or I was listening to something and it came on, but I haven't really kind of looked at it to,
Yeah, there's a lot to look through.
yeah,
Yeah, it's cool, but I think if rock music is going to thrive in the way that it has through each of the decades that I've previously talked about as well, from the 50s to 2000s, it has to continue to innovate, be experimental, and a theme that I notice is rejecting the past.
yeah,
And for me, like for the punks, it was rejecting the 80s hair metal, and it just always kind of follows some trend. Or like how progressive rock is like a 17-minute song. So punks said we're just going to do it in 2 minutes with a few power chords, and people
Right.
loved it. I think it is about rejecting the past. So we may see some form of rejection from 2010's music.
Yeah, and I think that as this everything is cyclical, and as the pendulum swings back, um, I see, like, we saw this with the like folk music, with like Mumford and Sons and the Lumineers, and people walking out with like banjos and mandolins, and you're like, what is this? But it came back in for a time, and then it kind of
Yep.
went away, and then
Yeah.
then the Mumford and Sons last album had like electric guitar and didn't have like banjo on it. You're like, oh, this is not what I thought that was.
Wow, that's like
This is why,
sacrificial. That's like Dylan in 65 going electric.
yeah, Dylan goes electric. Absolutely. Well, this is where we have, the urban blues and folk rock. It was
Yeah.
just folk music before he plugged in. Then it was folk rock. But I think, yeah, as these things will come back, and there will be influences, and we'll start seeing certain revivals of certain things,
Mhm.
probably, but in new ways, not in the same way. Like, we're never gonna have um, a Beatles or a Zeppelin,
Right.
or that
No
just like.
Beatlemania. That's not going to happen again. It's just there's.
Right. I mean, we see what BTS, and there's like some K-pop
Oh
groups
yeah. All
that
right.
will have certain, but that's not Beatlemania, because Beatlemania was like across the spectrum, and it just
Exactly.
like it changed fashion, and it changed. I mean, shout out to K-pop fans. They've been doing good work with like anti political call-in lines, and I like what that community is doing. I don't want to get them on your bad side. The Hamilton community and the K-pop community are coming for you. But yeah, it'll come back, and we'll see influences, and we'll see people dipping back into it. And again, like, that can be a good thing, because the music that I like, I still have access to it, and I can still engage with it, and I can still be open to to new forms of musical expression as we move forward.
Right. Yeah. I think there is going to that we have seen a resurgence of rock music over the past decade, and if if that's all we get and nothing new is created, we may face a period of time where rock music will die out because I think it just has to continue to innovate.
Agreed. I agree.
Um, so there was a point I was going to bring up. Uh, I guess I would like to ask you what you think, how you think COVID-19 is affecting the future of music, because we're off to a bad start of 2020, and is
Yeah.
this something that will pass and continue like on schedule as they used to, or is this going to just greatly change like music?
I think one of the very real issues that we're facing is a lot of local small clubs are shutting down. They're closing their doors, and the clubs are largely where you could go see local bands, where you could see some smaller touring groups. Maybe they were on their way down, but they were coming through town, and they were going to play your local town. And I feel like the more that we lose out on venues for, this is especially geared towards rock and roll music, if we're losing our bars where this happens, if we lose our clubs, if we lose the small theaters that would put on these shows, I think it will become more challenging for bands who are up and coming and want to get out there and want to play and want to get some recognition to find that platform, because there's billions of videos uploaded to YouTube every, well, maybe a billion videos uploaded to YouTube every day. Don't quote me on that. It's a lot.
A
And
lot.
there's
I think it's like
so
three
many.
billion. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's an insane amount. And so, in some ways, like, the way that you build a local following is by playing local shows, and we saw this with the Cavern Club with the Beatles, or certain clubs in Seattle that where Nirvana kind of cut their teeth. And if those have gone away because they were forced to close because they couldn't stay open, or they couldn't afford their rent because COVID has shut everything down, I
Hmm.
think it's going to be harder for some bands to make those opportunities. But in some ways, we've been talking about innovation. Maybe these times you can't get together, and we saw this with the Post Malone thing. They were all in different spaces, but they were creating, and then it was kind of mixed all together. I think that there are probably musicians who have been forced into or been given the opportunity to collaborate through distances with musicians who aren't in their area, maybe who have spent this time songwriting and kind of experimenting with more music technology because we're just sitting in front of our laptops, 12 hours a day every day for 6 months. And so I think one of the interesting things that in the music world is like we know that things aren't going to quote unquote go back to normal after this is over and we all have vaccines. Uh, but where on the spectrum will it fall? Where will there be places to play live? Will people be more innovative because they're engaging with technology in a way that they weren't forced to do previously, but now they're using cloud-based JAWs because they can't all get to the same studio to record because it's not safe or whatever.
Exactly.
So I think it'll be interesting to see how things kind of snap back. And that's not just in music, that's in education and society never. Like, we're not probably at Montclair State University just going to go back to like, oh, most every class is in person all the time because we've seen like, oh, certain things can work this way and it's actually easier for students to have access here. And then these things need to be in person to have these experiences.
Right.
So I think it's too early to fully understand, but anytime I read about a club or a venue or a bar that hosts a lot of live music shutting their doors because COVID put them out of business.
That's a shame.
It is a shame, and I feel like there could be some lasting effects of that for bands who want to get their stuff out there.
Yeah,
There's not venues with
definitely.
which to do that, So I'm hoping for the best, but there could be some challenges there.
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's hard to believe, but the next few months are going to be worse than it's ever been, they say. So
Yeah.
that's going to change things as well. And yeah, totally. The whole during quarantine, so many artists have been releasing music through that. Just like home recordings. I think that's still interesting. They're trying to think optimistically and adapt and still release some
Right.
content during this time. I think that will change the way people will get music. And I mean, I have my new MacBook I just got this semester, and I love using GarageBand because I actually used to record on my phone. And although I could do it, it was still not the best, but I could do it. And just
Yeah.
everyone has a phone. I think that's we're moving in a direction where so many people can have access to recording their own stuff and releasing it, social media or SoundCloud, all those kind of
Yep.
places.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I do have a question for you before we leave.
Sure.
You mentioned the Beatlemania, how we'll never have that again, and I totally agree with you. So, what are your thoughts on that movie Yesterday, if you had seen it? I'm sure you
I
might know the
have seen it.
concept.
Yeah. So I have, and I feel like this is a good thing about me. I am able to watch a movie and enjoy it for what it is. And I don't have to feel the need to like tear movies apart. Like I like Star Wars, and I saw the Star Wars movies, and I'm like, I liked them. I thought they're good. And the Star Wars purists were like, yeah, but what about this and what about that? And they
Yeah,
ruined
you
the
don't want to mess with
legacy.
them. Don't
Yeah,
talk bad on Star Wars fans on my podcast.
I know. I'm just getting all the hate mail coming to you. I liked it. I like Beatles music. I liked the characters in it. I liked the moment where John Lennon is
Me
alive,
too. That
and
was a
and
very
and I
good
thought that
scene.
was like that was emotionally like, oh man, like right. He would. What if he was still alive, and what would happen? But
Oh,
again, good music, and I really liked it, and I thought and I liked it more than I liked other biopics like Rocket Man with Elton John or even the Queen one. I saw them
mhm.
all and I like that music and it's good. But I don't know. I really liked it, but I love Beatles music and a lot of it was just him and an acoustic guitar, and so it was a throwback to like things that I connect with. But I thought it was good. So if there are people who
Yeah.
are Beatles fans, now, if you're a diehard Beatles fan and whatever, and that's gonna ruin something for you, then don't see it. But I thought it was well done and I enjoyed it.
I'm happy you liked it because I would agree that I liked it too. I'm also a very huge Beatles fan, but I guess the concept was a little hard for me to like kind of understand. It was just like come on, would Beatles music really make that much of a huge difference like it did in the movie today? It's hard to say, but they also
Maybe
kind
we'll
of were
never
they
know.
well maybe they were kind of self-aware with it, so I did like it, of course. I also really love the movie Across the Universe, which
Yeah,
one of my
exactly. And
favorite
and that
movies.
that's a testament to the Beatles and their music and the and I and then we got to go because I got a thing and I'm just rambling forever. But the Beatles' career, as I'm sure you touched on, was really brief. You know, they come out in '64 at the Ed Sullivan, and then by like '68, they're pretty much done. And in
I
that,
mentioned that point a lot. Most people don't know that it's like a 6 year
right,
run.
well, because they've had such an effect on culture for decades after they broke up, and right, so such a short amount of time, and they've had such an amazing effect that I think it's a testament to that their music can still connect with college kids and people in their 40s who missed Beatlemania totally. You know, I grew up in the 80s. I was around for all of the 80s, but like that's when I started listening to music. And so I think that is a testament that we do have some of these iconic bands that will be with us forever.
Definitely.
And that people will just kind of continually explore and connect with for generations to come. And that's an encouraging thought, I think.
Thank you so much. Is there any final thoughts on anything we talked about that you want to say?
Yeah, no, I would just leave, you know, whoever listens to your podcast, like listen to the music that you like. It doesn't matter what other people listen to. There's so many things that connect with different people in different ways. So like, you know, if you like something and like don't be ashamed to like anything. If you're a big Ariana Grande fan,
No
awesome.
such thing
Like
as a guilty pleasure.
yeah,
If you like
100%.
ABBA,
Like
ABBA, man.
exactly. Listen to what you want to listen to because music helps us, you know, navigate the human experience. And that's a very powerful thing. So thanks for having me on your podcast. I
Thank you so
appreciate
much for
it.
coming on.
And I look forward to listening to the previous shows and checking those out.
Of course, I will keep you updated, and I'll send you everything that I've done so far. So
That sounds
again,
great.
thank you so much for being on, and enjoy the rest of your weekend and your semester. And hopefully, we can chat in the future soon.
Yeah, you as well. When we're back on campus and, you know, COVID's over, we'll get together and listen to some Beatles tunes.
Sounds great. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Yeah, have a good one. Talk to you
You
soon.
too.